So welcome to a conversation with producer Mariana Tosca, p.g.a. Mariana is a Mensa. She is a member of Greater Los Angeles area Mensa, and our writer, director, Christopher Johnson of Journey to Royal, a World War II rescue mission. So welcome, Mariana and Chris.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. We're very happy to be here with you.
Thank you very much.
This is a real treat to be doing a presentation for Mensa and to be meeting all of you. We've been working on this for over 10 years, and so it's really exciting to finally have it out in the world and reaching audiences and to be able to share behind the scenes details about it with you. Oh, and I just want to do a shout out really quickly for our legal representation, Mark Levy, who is also a member of Mensa.
I love to watch the credit rolls at the end of the movies, because I can't believe how many people are involved in making a film, and this one is no exception. Chris, I want to ask you, your name appears much more than others. You know, you're the director, you're the executive producer, writer, photographer, and you even composed and performed the Haunting Royals theme. Is that right? Wow. Yeah. What made you decide to do this film and contribute so much to it?
Well, I mean, it's rare that you have an opportunity to tell a story that has a personal family connection. I'd say that happens, the percentage of time that happens in life is minuscule. It's got to be. So when you've got something that there's the family connection with, and it moves you personally, that fills you with all of these ideas and emotions about what you're trying to do and what you're trying to convey and why you'd even go down that road. Because the good and the bad of it is that you learn a lot about your family member, and it's a privilege to be able to bring about a situation with the help of everybody that you said that was in the end credit scroll, to actually accomplish making a picture, because that in and of itself is such an overwhelming task. There's so many components to that. So all the family connection was really the thing that drew me to this particular thing. And the downside of that is that as you learn more about what happened in those events and you interface with these people, you get a real window into the realities of war. And as Mariana will attest, when we were in the presence of these veterans that we interviewed for the picture, this is an experience for them that was like last week. And you're sometimes asking people to reflect on what was possibly the most horrifying thing that they've had to encounter. And you're doing it to fill out a story, to learn more about a family member. So there's a lot of components, and it's a nuanced approach. And we had to find our footing in terms of how to approach this and come to the end that we came to. And I'm glad we did, because the response to it seems to be very positive. But that decade where we were making that picture together, that was a lot of work and a lot of process of discovery, because it wasn't a traditional approach. You know, it wasn't like, okay, we have a script and we're going to go film the script and post produce it and then get it out into the world. This was laced with all kinds of personal and interpersonal and real world scenarios that added a whole different dimension to it.
Just to jump back for a second, when Chris was talking about interviewing the veterans, we were so enthusiastic and excited about meeting these people and being able to talk with them and get on film their firsthand accounts directly from the people who made history. And we spent time with a survivor of the USS Indianapolis, and we spent time with a survivor of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and we interviewed the gentleman who actually flew the surrender documents to the USS Missouri for the representative of Japan to sign. So we were going to be meeting all of these people who had a very important role in a consequential significant event of World War II. And so we were very excited about getting in there and speaking with them. And pretty early on, we came to realize that we needed to temper that enthusiasm, because for some of these people, the memories and the stories that they were going to be sharing were traumatic events in their lives. And so we needed to approach this with a certain tact and frame it in a way that underscored the importance of preserving history that these people were a part of. And much to their credit, every single one of these veterans just stepped right up.
I've seen the film. Everyone needs to see this. It's amazing. And Mariana, you didn't have the family connection. So how did you get involved, and how did you use your incredibly rich and varied background in the work, doing the work for this, Mariana?
Actually, my varied background is what led me to this film. Chris and I had met at a press screening of a film with which I was peripherally involved. It was a film about the plight of elephants. And Chris was in the audience that night. And afterward, there was a panel of various experts and speakers doing a Q&A. And I was one of the people on that panel. And at the end of our talk, Chris came up to me and told me how moved he was by what we had said, and that he wanted to offer his skills and talents to help us in our animal protection efforts. And so, of course, I immediately recruited him to come along on a trip that I was going to be taking to New Mexico the next week, where we were going to be moving a family of chimpanzees from a defunct biomedical research facility to their new sanctuary home in Florida. And I know you're probably thinking, what do chimpanzees have to do with World War II? But it was on that trip across country that Chris first told me of his great uncle and this event that occurred close to the end of the war, which claimed his great uncle's life while he was saving the lives of 9 other men. And when he was going into more detail about the story, I learned that this group of young servicemen, the 4th Emergency Rescue Squadron, they were flying into the most treacherous theater of the South Pacific without armament in most cases, because they had removed their machine guns from their planes in order to make room for the injured airmen that they were going to be rescuing and bringing on board. So they were flying into enemy territory without protection, without being able to defend themselves. They had their sidearms on them, but a sidearm can't really do much when you're dealing with a submarine or Zero or enemy fire. And so this rescue squadron logged over 6,000 hours of flight time and flew nearly 900 rescue missions. And that squadron saved the lives of 576 men who would not have survived and whose lineal descendants would never have existed had it not been for the efforts of the 4th Emergency Rescue Squadron. And so when I heard of this, I said, I absolutely have to be involved. I have to be a part of preserving their history and making sure that their astonishing, valiant service is remembered and honored and not forgotten or lost to time. And so this has been my privilege coming along on this decade-long journey with Chris. I have come to know and love these extraordinary, ordinary people. And I say that because all of these people, all these veterans, without exception, when we would visit and talk with them, there was no pomp and circumstance surrounding them. They were as humble as you can be. And they didn't view their contribution to world history as anything grand or exceptional. They just viewed it as it was their job, and they did it to the best of their ability. And in doing so, they changed the world. And righted the ship, so to speak. So in producing a film, there are thousands of components that all have to coalesce in some way. And so there's a pressure to make sure that occurs. But for me, the real pressure was to match the high bar already set by these veterans through their service and the sacrifices they made.
And in their sharing of the stories in the interviews, there's that bar that Mariana's talking about requires a fidelity to the events and the depiction of the events, because to mishandle this would, I can't even articulate the profound importance of not mishandling the legacy of these people. So there's that bar is something that you're constantly thinking of, and you're trying to improve your game to better yourself through the process over this long period of time, so that you can match that challenge, meet that challenge, and succeed, on their behalf. And the interesting thing about this picture is, normally when you're talking about a piece of fiction or a film that you've made, or you do a press junket, you're talking about a creative process. It's an art form, and there's a certain business aspect that you're required to go through the paces, and you believe in the project in the best case scenario. So yes, you want to share it with the world, absolutely. But the thing about this particular one, I think, is the compulsion is to champion these stories for these people on their behalf. And so it feels like there's less vanity involved, or no vanity involved, because it's not about, oh, look at us film it, flashy camera shots and stuff like that. It's really about the heart and soul of what it represents. And it's difficult for me personally not to be, to talk about the connection with these people, because I become emotional about it, because that's the impact they have on you when you're in the room with them. They're sharing these types of things that family members often haven't heard their entire life, because it was such a dramatic event in their life, and traumatizing in many cases, that these stories went untold. And so one of the beautiful side effects, collateral side effects of making the picture, is that Mariana and I were able to include the family members of these veterans and give them a reason to talk about something that they otherwise wouldn't necessarily want to talk about. And so the burden wasn't on them for a reason. It was, at that point, they were able to just freely share. And then we would try to steer them through those experiences as truthfully, but as painlessly as possible. And oftentimes we found there was this very strange reversal of gratitude. We were so appreciative to be there, to hear these stories, and to spend time with these people. And at the end of it, they would end up thanking us, because in some cases there was a kind of a healing that went on, because war and PTSD and all of the things that come along with those experiences create a different persona that can sometimes be misinterpreted by people. And so perhaps a behavior or a disposition that caused friction in the family over a certain number of years, that went unexplained and misunderstood, was suddenly clarified. And the understanding that these experiences brought about within the families was a really wonderful thing to see, because you would see it in the faces of the family members. Something would kind of melt away, and there would be a different kind of a connection there.
In fact, I remember in one case we were interviewing a veteran, and the family members who had joined us hadn't been in the same room with each other for a very long time. And so over the course of the interview, as more details were being shared, you could see a sort of softening of the edges, like Chris was saying, a melting away. And by the end of it, they had reunited in some way, which was really lovely to witness. So it ended up being beneficial for everybody involved. It was beneficial for us as filmmakers because we were getting the interviews and the content we needed for our film. It was beneficial for the veterans because they were able to tell their stories and contribute to the preservation of world history. And it was beneficial for the family members because it was palliative in a way. And perhaps they were able to find a new understanding or even a new sense of pride. In a way, they were able to rekindle the family fire, so to speak.
Mariana, you must have some recollections of making the film. What was really special for you?
Well, first and foremost, my answer has to be meeting and spending time with and befriending all of these veterans. I'm thinking of Lyle Umenhofer, who was a survivor of the USS Indianapolis, and just being in his home with him and hearing his stories and seeing all the memorabilia that he's collected over the years and hearing about his experience on that ship when she was hit by 2 torpedoes and falling into a burning oil slick and then being adrift without food or water on the open ocean for 5 days, and hearing about how he found other survivors in the water and how they banded together in circles and put the more badly injured people in the center to protect them from the ubiquitous sharks and barracuda that were relentlessly bombarding them the entire time they were in the water. And then learning about Lieutenant Commander Adrian Marks and his PBY flying in to rescue Lyle and the other survivors. Another veteran I'm thinking of is George Keane, who is a survivor of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And I remember him telling the story about when he saw his ship for the first time, the USS Hopkins. It had the number 13 written on it. And I remember him saying that that didn't sit very well with him. But that ship made it through the entire Pacific campaign and only lost 1 man. So he said after the war, the number 13 became his lucky number. Another heartwarming memory I have is when we went to Washington, D.C. I had asked some friends of mine in Congress if we could get a posthumous congressional commendation for Royal to honor his heroic service. And I had asked for one for Harold, Chris's grandfather as well, who was also in the service. And so Harold was going to be meeting us in D.C. He thought he was going there to be accepting this congressional commendation on his brother's behalf. He didn't know that he was going to be getting one as well. So that was sort of the surprise twist to the trip. And being in that room with Harold at the head of a receiving line with all these members of Congress coming through and congratulating him and thanking him for his service. The look of gratitude and joy on Harold's face, I'll just never forget that. Another really fun memory for me is when we went to an air museum to do some filming, and there was a visiting B-25 there that was doing public rides. And we had scheduled Chris to go up to get some footage from the front gunners area. We were going to be cutting that into the B-29 ditching sequence, just for as POV shots, simulating the inside of the glass house on a B-29. And so Chris went up and I remained earthbound, taking stills of this incredible adventure he was having in the air. And I was so happy for him, but there was a tiny part of me that was a little crestfallen because I didn't get to go up. But when they landed, I guess the pilot and the co-pilot must have seen some sort of look on my face, like a child that was watching somebody eat the last piece of dessert and didn't get any. And so the pilot, right out of Top Gun in this gorgeous flight suit, walks up to me and slaps a sticker on my arm that has B-25 written on it. And he says, "You're going up with us on the next flight." I was so excited. And true to their word, they took me up on the next flight. It was the pilot, the co-pilot, and me, just the 3 of us up there. And I made my way back to the tail gunner seat, which on the B-25 is the catbird seat. And when you're back there, you're sort of surrounded in 3 walls of glass, and you're sitting in the opposite direction, facing the opposite direction than the nose. And out of nowhere on the starboard side of the plane, this P-51 Mustang appeared and started flying in formation with us. And to my estimation, he must have been about 50 yards away because I could see the pilot's face so clearly. And I know he could see how excited I was. So he flew in tandem with us for a while. And then as cinematically and dramatically as he appeared, he tipped his wing. He gave me a wing waggle to sort of tip his hat to me. And then he waggled and whew, he was gone, just like that. I was completely giddy when we landed. When we were shooting in the PBY, actually, we had to go to Palm Springs several times to finish the filming that we needed there. But this one time in particular, we were shooting from the radar operators area, and they happened to be having an air show that day. And so we were shooting out his window, and we were filming this really intense scene where our hero crew is not sure if they're being sabotaged or not, and they're all looking out their windows anxiously trying to spot enemy aircraft. And as we're shooting, this Japanese Zero was doing a flyby right at that moment outside the window that we were filming out of. It was really, really funny. Just as a side note, the president was visiting Palm Springs that day as well, and he had landed Air Force One on one of the airstrips that was adjacent to the museum. And so when we were finished filming for the day and we were loading all of our equipment out of the plane, we looked up and saw this monolith of an aircraft with the presidential seal on it. It just made the whole thing even more surreal. First a Japanese Zero and then Air Force One. So we covered both sides.
I want to mention that if any of you have questions, put it in the chat to me. And Mike has a question about how you did your research, Chris. And I think that goes into how you did the whole hybrid thing. You know, I mean, I was amazed with this film that you seamlessly had interwoven the narrative with the documentary and the live action. And it's just amazing to me. So tell us how that process came about.
Well, our first interview actually was with John Logan, who was the last surviving member of Royal's crew. And it was a research interview because the initial concept was, for years of family reunions and learning about this person and meeting his widow, I knew that there was some aspect of this that I wanted to create film about. And so the first interview was a research interview in order to get the story so that I could write a narrative feature film script about this event. And then after we heard his interview in the moment, as it's unfolding, it became very clear that this story wasn't some fictionalized account of this. It was the actual events told by the people who experienced it and heightened by the narrative dramatic aspects of feature film storytelling. Stories write themselves. And what you do in the best case scenario is you listen. And as we were listening, the story began to unfold, and artists and painters, like everybody has their own process of inspiration. And so what happens with me personally is I'll hear something and it will trigger some sort of sense memory of music. And the music will be something consistent with that emotion so that I can hang on to it. So I'll picture a piece of, or I'll hear a piece of music that it combines with the story I'm hearing. And that's because I'm also a musician, obviously, you know, as we discussed, that's the touchstone that allows me to return to the emotions I remember in the moment of those interviews. And so without going too far down the rabbit hole here, you try to convey as close to the emotional impact that you experience in the picture. And so the dramatizations were born out of a need to amplify the storytelling and move away from the talking head situation of the classic documentary to immerse the audience in a situation so that they could feel what Mariana and I were feeling in the moment hearing these stories. Because as we were there in the room, it wasn't like listening to somebody talk about Pearl Harbor or landing in Tokyo Bay. We're people who visualize things as a profession. And so we were in those moments with those people. And so extrapolate that out to the process of learning about the literal story about Royal, from the last surviving crew member to the different squadron members, to amassing over 600 pages of transcribed interviews and reducing that down to the thread that ties them all together and interfaces with World War II. And that begins to give you an idea of how you conceptualize where this is going to go. And then you just try to listen to where that story is taking you, and those peaks, because every story has peaks and valleys, every interview has peaks and valleys. And in a film situation where you've got 90 minutes, you're trying to capitalize on those peaks so that the audience gets maximum impact and information in the minimal amount of time. I hope that jumble of sentences conveyed some aspect of what it was like for us in the trenches, trying to sort through voluminous amounts of material. And you asked about research earlier. The best research that we had was the veterans themselves. They essentially handed us all of the information and all of the tools and the puzzle pieces that you would need to put it together. And the responsibility on our end is to decipher how those pieces fit together.
One of our audience members, Doug, he says he wants to thank Chris and Mariana for creating such a wonderful film. It's utterly amazing and so much more than I expected. And Mariana, I saw you in the cockpit with the actors, and Doug also wants to know what was used for the filming of the interior shots in the B-29. There was a mention of museums.
So the interior shots of the B-29 were filmed on an actual B-29. It's called the Three Feathers, and it's housed at the Marchfield Air Museum. The interior shots of the PBY were shot on Harriet's Chariot, which is a PBY housed at the Palm Springs Air Museum. The exterior flying shots of the B-29, those are entirely model shots. And then there's a shot of the PBY on Iwo Jima, and that's a composite of a model shot with plate photography of our actors on location. Because in the case of the PBY, that plane had been modified after the war for civilian use. And so the nose turret had been removed and the paint scheme was changed. And so for our purposes, because we needed to be historically accurate, we had to restore the paint scheme and put that nose turret back on her. Both the Palm Springs Air Museum and the Marchfield Air Museum have become partners in our preservation effort. Greg Kenny, who's the education coordinator at the Palm Springs Air Museum, and Jeff Houlihan, who is the curator of the Marchfield Air Museum, both of those wonderful guys have been invaluable assets for us. And both of them have become trusted friends and staunch supporters of our efforts. I think I can speak for Chris when I say that because we spent so much time in the heart and soul of those machines when we were filming, it's always a pleasure to go back and visit.
Doug has another question about the source of the shots of the B-17 dropping a Higgins boat in the middle of the film.
I believe that's critical past, but Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Doug is
he's got a good eye.
Good attention to detail there. There's a couple stock footage libraries that you can easily access, and they've got a fairly good filing system. One of them is Critical Past, and the National Archives also has a series of films that they have transferred in high resolution and put up on their site. And so what it really entailed was searching this voluminous catalog with key search words for the specific instances of either literal footage from the events that were taking place that we're trying to cover, or events that would approximate or were similar, and perhaps they were in a different theater or a different year. And so it was just having an eye and a sense for what you were looking for, because a lot of cases the descriptions were sort of broad, and you would have to kind of intuit where these things were going to go. And it took months and months and months of just screening archive footage to find the exact snippets that end up in the picture. So maybe the amount of archive film that's actually in the movie is probably 1/1000th of the amount of stuff that we actually had to sift through. The dropping of that boat, because the rescue squadron, Doug, they used two different kinds of airplanes in the rescue efforts. One was the p.g.a. Catalina, which were designated OA-10As, which is observation amphibians. And then there was the B-17s, which carried the Higgins boats. They obviously couldn't land in the water like the PBYs, but they would drop those boats. And in concert with the PBYs and the other rescue life-saving efforts, which was the submarines and some of the ships, were designated life-saving. They all had these interesting names too. Like one of them that's highlighted in the film is Playmate. So everything was encoded. So that was another level of, you're trying to get through what the code names were to figure out, what are they really talking about here? What's a play? But yeah, so the B-17 and the PBYs were two planes that we did searches to try to find footage from. And there's two instances of B-17s in the film dropping the Higgins boat. One's in color and one's in black and white. And those were literally the only two instances of a B-17 dropping one of those boats that we were able to find. So I'm sure there's more of that footage out there, but hasn't necessarily been transferred, and it hasn't been necessarily made available. The other thing that you have to remember is, and one of the other reason our names appear so often in the credits is, this isn't a multi-million-dollar picture. This is a film where we had to do as many of the aspects of the picture as were required. Oftentimes what you would do is you would have a whole research division that would go to the National Archives, find all of these film reels, pull the film reels, clean the film reels, transfer them, then digitally clean them up so that they looked in their best possible version to depict in the picture. So we didn't have the research wing of the picture. I mean, you're looking at it smarter than me. And so that was it. By the end of the week, our eyes would be bloodshot, and you didn't want to watch anything. But that's how we found that. The long answer to that question is that's how we found the footage of the B-17s and the Higgins boats, was just combing through all of that stuff. I wish we had a research department, because the treasure that is in the National Archives, I want to discover that stuff and experience it just from a knowledge-based standpoint. What a fascinating archive on history. The stuff that we all end up seeing in the documentary films, like we were talking about earlier, that's just the peaks of it. Sometimes it's the mundanity that is captured in those moments that tell the heart and the soul of a moment. It's not always the action and quote action adventure high drama moments. So, but yeah, that's how we did that.
He says his father was the navigator on the Bulgin Bessie.
I was going to say, he had to have had a relative in World War II.
Yes, he has a personal. A lot of us have, this is very personal for a lot of us, because a lot of our dads, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles served in World War II. And some of us, like Mike was saying, that his father and his uncle never talked about it. So he's wondering whether, Chris, your grandfather did talk about it, or you had to kind of find out more on your own about the whole thing.
No, my grandfather did not talk about it.
Oh.
Yeah, my grandfather was a sweet, kind, quiet person, and he, I think that's who he always was. But I think what the war did to him was it gave him perspective about what was important in life, and arguments and cussing. I never heard my grandfather swear ever. So whatever it was that impacted him in that moment, You know, it's impossible to tell what he would have been like, obviously, without that experience. But he went through his life trying to uphold the best case scenario in every instance. Whether it was an interaction with somebody, you were always the focus of his attention. He gave you his full attention, and he never spoke badly about anybody. And so talking about the war and the war effort was not something that he was ever going to do just spontaneously. So in fact, I could see early on, before the picture was even, before we were making it, I would ask him about his brother, and he would give a sort of a topical answer about the fondness of his memory in childhood. And, you know, but when you got down into it, you could see that it was painful for him, and it was still very, very real. It's not in the picture, but he gets quite emotional when he's reflecting on the friendship and love he has for his brother, because it's just, it was right there under the surface. So no, we as with the other veterans, are requiring this story for a film gave us an excuse to sort of delve into this history that we wouldn't otherwise have had. And I think that would be the common experience with all of these veterans. I think it was the exception that any of them were not affected in a way that made them free to talk about it.
I do remember that being the recurring theme throughout our interviews. The veterans sort of finally gave themselves permission to tell their stories. And we were extremely conscious of the preciousness and fragility and the worth of the memories. And I believe instinctively that they understood that we were taking very seriously the responsibility of being the custodians of their history.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they were able to talk about it with you, but probably, like you said, their families learned about it from you because they didn't share it with them, you know, because there are too many difficult memories to personally share with your own family. So that's why this is so important, you know, and you've said, there's a symbolism of clouds in the film, isn't there? And gossamer, and that you felt you had to do this while there were still some people around to tell the story, right, Chris?
Well, there's a sort of ephemeral quality to stories and clouds and things of that nature. And Mariana and I both felt this was the sands of time that are constantly working against you. That's true on every level, whether it's trying to get your shot list done for the day, or whether it's trying to capture these stories well, frankly, they're still able to be preserved. They became that kind of symbol of trying to chase these stories, because when we were doing the model and effects photography, we wanted that to be as real as we could make it. So we were taking these model planes, running them on wires against real skies in most cases. And so living in Southern California, the clouds that matched the intent of the picture were fleeting of themselves. So we would constantly be checking the weather forecasts and looking in the sky. And is today the day we get the gang together and run up to the rooftops and shoot the planes? And it started to feel, I actually, like with anything else in it, I started to feel a personal connection with that plight of trying to capture those moments, those fleeting moments. And we felt that way about the stories of the veterans. You know, we're in this wonderful age where we have these things like Zoom and we can see everybody and talk to everybody. And the thing about the experience of making this picture and hearing these stories is you forget about what it might have really been like to be out in the middle of the ocean on two inflatable rafts with a group of people with limited or no food in enemy territory. What is that really like? And we're never, hopefully, never going to have that experience if we're lucky. But to get a fraction of that experientially and bottle that magic and put it in the picture, that was the challenge. And it ties back to that symbolism of the fleeting gossamer clouds. Grab it while you can, because in 15 minutes, it's not going to be there for you to experience.
Yeah. Well, in a minute, we're going to look at some more clips from the film, and Mariana will tell them about each of them. But first, I wanted to ask Mariana about how you're managing with post-production and pandemic. It must be a nightmare.
Yeah, how your film looks and sounds is kind of important. So color grading and sound are critical components of post-production. And with COVID and the protocols that were put in place, masks, social distancing, even air purification and filtration systems, things like that made it a little more challenging for us, because typically when you do sound and color, you're in the same room with the artists who are working on those. And for instance, in our case, for sound, one of the walls in the studio had been removed, and we were actually sitting outside in a courtyard behind our re-recording mixer, down the barrel of the directional sound, but still removed. So that was really something. It required a heightened focus that had a tangible effect on our objective artistry, so to speak. And that worked both ways, not just for us as filmmakers, but for the color and sound folks as well. So yeah, the pandemic did put a wrench in things for us. Another way it impacted us is that we didn't get to have our in-person film premiere. The Palm Springs Air Museum did let us do a fundraiser screening for them pre-pandemic, and we were able to show the film on a large screen and see it in its first iteration with a rather large audience. So that was great.
I don't think anybody else could have done what the two of you have done. Honestly, the more I find out about it, the more I'm awed.
Oh, thank you, Roberta.
Thank you so much. Very kind.
Another thing I should mention is if you buy the Blu-ray or the DVD, there's a bonus feature that you can access through the main menu. And it's a 12-minute featurette called Chasing Clouds, The Making of Journey to Royal. And Roberta has seen it, so she can attest to this. It just takes you behind the scenes and shows you how the film was made. And I think you might find it very interesting. As Chris said, the film was not funded by a major studio. It was all self-funded. And we had a very, very small crew of intrepid and fiercely loyal people who came along with us on this amazing adventure. And you'll be able to see some of what went on in that featurette. So be sure to look for it if you get the Blu-ray or the DVD.
I'm sure I can speak for everyone here how impressed we are with this film, and it's had a lot of notice already, hasn't it? It's been out for a little while, and what kinds of responses have you received?
Well, the response has been overwhelmingly positive, which is lovely. We made a promise to all of these vets that we would make sure their stories would be archived and told for future generations. And so to that end, we're just trying to get as many people as possible to know about the film. The Hollywood machine is gearing back up now because restrictions are being loosened, and all of those productions that were on hold during the pandemic are now in high gear on steroids, trying to make up for lost time and get their product out to audiences. And I'm a little nervous that we're going to get drowned out. We're not a big, sexy blockbuster film, but I do believe that our film has incredible value. It has value archivally, and it has value soulfully. And I just hope that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
the film seems like a study in humanity to me and compassion. And I think that's one of the things that also is important to mention about the picture, that this isn't about death and violence and strategy, to take a hill or something like that. This is about the human spirit and what it takes to preserve life and do something exceptional against the backdrop of a horrifying world engagement of, frankly, death and destruction, to overcome hopefully one of the worst things we'll ever see in history. So we hope that because of those intrinsic qualities, that it will find its audience and people will recognize it as a different aspect of that conflict, and find value in it for its antithetical representation of what is commonly an overglorified sort of reductive narrative subject matter.
Well, and now your film is on all the streaming services.
Yes, it's available on multiple streaming platforms. Anyone with Amazon Prime can watch it on there. And you can also purchase the Blu-ray or DVD through most online retailers.
And read Mariana's article in the current Mensa Bulletin about the film. It's a beautiful article. And we are the ones who benefited from you're taking 10 years to honor the memory of these wonderful heroes who, you said that it was a job for them. I think they would say it was a duty for them. And this has been wonderful that you've all done that for us as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And,
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
What's next for you both creatively? I mean, you're both creative geniuses, so I'm sure that you're thinking ahead already.
Well, we do have a couple of narrative films that are in the works, and one other documentary that we're going to be getting to. But for the short term, right now, we're just focused on making sure that as many people as possible hear about our film. And we just want to make sure that we keep Journey to Royal afloat.
Thank you so much, Mariana, and thank you for making us part of this. And I hope that it works out for the World Gathering.
Oh, so do I.
Certainly for the regional gathering in November.
Yeah.
Mike, it's the middle or end of November. I think because it's the month of Veterans Day. So hey,
That would be perfect timing.
so that would really be wonderful to spread the news about this around the country and around the world.
Oh, that would be wonderful. And thank you again.
Word of mouth is everything for us,
On behalf of Chris and myself and the entire cast and crew of Journey to Royal, I just wanted to thank everybody who joined us today and who stuck around to learn more about the film. I just wanted to end with a couple of paragraphs from an essay that I wrote called The Stars Turned Gold. It was published in a couple of the Mensa newsletters, and I just wanted to end with this. This film is our final salute to the greatest generation and to all who served in the global conflict of the Second World War. It is our letter of ineffable gratitude to those who answered the call of duty and made the ultimate sacrifice. The world is full of heroes whose stories we may never know, but that doesn't diminish or invalidate the value of their contributions. The story of the 4th Emergency Rescue Squadron's noble service was not an uncommon one. From front lines to assembly lines, an inherent sense of duty and commitment pervaded that era when America had a unity of purpose. Despite differences in background, personal beliefs, or politics, millions banded together and proved that the power of unification could triumph over seemingly insurmountable adversity. As we approach the last Monday of May, when barbecues, baseball games, picnics, and parades, usher in the unofficial start of summer. Let us stop to remember and honor those who will not be in attendance, the servicemen and women who left their final footprints on the battlefields of the world. Let us remember to give thanks for the freedom and opportunities their sacrifice has afforded us. For all of us who are beneficiaries of their service, every day should be Memorial Day. Thank you all for joining us today. This has been a real treat.
Oh, can't thank you enough. Really appreciate it.
Well, we can't thank you enough, Chris. It was an honor to meet you at last, Mariana. And thank you to all of you who've spent this afternoon with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you.